Welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. Today we'll be continuing our adventures into the wonderful Victorian London era of Jago and Lightfoot as I take a look at the second series featuring Christopher Benjamin as Henry Jago and of course Trevor Baxter as Professor George Lightfoot. Okay, so if you haven't seen the previous reviews from this series already, I have reviewed The Talons of Weng Chiang, The Mahogany Murders and the complete series 1 of Jago and Lightfoot. So to kind of get the main adventure of what's happened so far, I definitely recommend checking out those reviews. And if you haven't in fact listened to Jago and Lightfoot at any point on Big Finish, then I definitely recommend going to the very beginning as well. As always, in the description below, will you link to go and buy this release from the Big Finish website. It is of course out now. It was released in January 2011 in fact, and the physical CD is £35 and the download is £30, so naturally it is at your full recommended retail price. However, I do believe that occasionally these ones do go on sale, so after having the more reduced Series 1 offer, we do now go up to full price of Series 2. And if you are interested by what I say in this review, which hopefully you will be, you can of course also listen to the trailer on the Big Finish website, as well as the story details as well for this whole series. So yeah, I definitely recommend checking those out. So yeah, the standard CD release for this is in fact this one here. How prepared of me, but yeah, this is basically your standard Big Finish box set in the lovely corrugated, well not corrugated, but the lovely card sleeve there, with the 4 cases on the inside. And the things with the early Jago Lightfoot series is in fact that we have this really nice cover artwork that is rather cartoony, and yeah, it's rather sort of basic at the same time, but rather effective. So yeah, that's rather cool. I do love the illustrations for this series. And yeah, we don't really have this in the later series. I think that finished on like series 4 or 5, something like that. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I definitely recommend buying the physical version, to be honest, because I don't tend to get a lot of physical Big Finish. I only get the ones that I really enjoy. And Jago Lightfoot is currently pretty much a good sort of nearly 50% of my shelf, because I need them for my whole row to sort of have the complete set there, because they do look lovely when on display. So taking a look at some of the story details on the Big Finish website now, as per usual, it is your standard format where you have 4 cases that are kind of interlinked throughout. So the first case is Lightfoot and Saunders, written by Justin Richards. Episode 2 is The Necropolis Express, written by Mark Morris. Episode 3 is The Theatre of Dreams, written by Jonathan Morris. And then the series finale is The Ruthven Inheritance, written by Andy Lane. And the whole series is directed by Jago Lightfoot's very own Lisa Bowerman, of course Ellie Higson. And this series does of course include Christopher Benjamin as Henry Jago, Trevor Baxter as George Lightfoot, Lisa Bowerman as Ellie Higson, Conrad Asquith as Sergeant Quick, and then we have a lot of other people in there as well playing Gabriel Saunders for this series, and David Collings. You have Chloe Holman as Mags, Alex Mallingson as landlord slash station master slash Fosco. You also have Vernon Doffchef in there as well. Jenny Stollen, Simon Williams and Duncan Wisby as well, returning as Dr. Ormond Sacker, which is somebody who we had previously in Series 1. So I do quite like that intertwining, sort of bringing back sort of more minor characters, really sort of creating this nice Jago and Lightfoot universe of reoccurring people, which is kind of cool. So yeah, we do have a really nice cast for the series, in fact, really creating this sort of atmosphere of Victorian London. We get a really nice range of different people, sort of ranging from the different areas of society as well. The people in Ruthven at the very end of the series are sort of more upper class people, sort of with a twist, as you will expect if you listen to the story. And then we also have people like Mags as well, who's somebody that Jago Lightfoot knows, which is somebody who at the very bottom of Victorian society, who is a sort of homeless match girl who is rather young and sells matches on the streets, and she kind of has this illusion that she is blind, but she's not really, which sort of links into the story. But yeah, a rather fun sort of range of different people, which is nice to see, really recreating that Victorian London feel. Take a look at a few of them. Christopher Benjamin first as Jago. Once again, I really enjoyed him throughout the story. I actually feel as a whole throughout this series that sort of the comedic aspects were kind of toned down. I think that this series is a little bit more serious. However, with being Jago and Lightfoot, you do naturally have a few comedic elements in there as well. So yeah, Christopher Benjamin was really enjoyable. He had some really nice moments, especially in the early half of the series where he kind of gets left out of the case and he feels rather sad about this and he kind of needs to work his way through. We also have a few personal plot lines that have been developed throughout this series as well, which is him losing his job at the theatre and then getting his own theatre by the very end of the series, creating the birth of the new Regency, which is rather exciting and a setting that we'll get very familiar with throughout the future series of Jago and Lightfoot up until, in fact, its very end in series 12 and series 13. So it's nice to finally see that bit of the plot kind of having its foundation. Then we also have Professor George Lightfoot in there as well, which sort of continues his pathology kind of stuff. We have sort of them bringing in dead bodies. He examines them, finding out that there's sort of some extraterrestrial elements that have took place, and then we kind of go into the actual case plot. So it's a rather basic setting for this series. However, once again, all of the main protagonists are in fact really enjoyable, and Lisa Bowerman has a little bit more of importance throughout the series as well. If you're somebody that is a fan of Jago and Lightfoot, you will of course know that series 2 is the birth of the vampiric plot, which is something that in fact returns in later series, meaning that Ellie in fact gets a little bit more personal to this series than we have in the previous one, which is nice to see. And as per usual, Conrad Asquith as well, a really great police officer. He's really fun. I love the way that he has friendly banter, kind of, as much as I hate that term with Lightfoot, and the way that they actually develop sort of this relationship between the Metropolitan Police and his private pathology work is really nice. Yeah, I do think that generally for this series, the cast is really strong as per usual. So the first episode of this series is Lightfoot and Saunders, that is in fact having a few elements that have been caught up from the series finale of series 1. Not really too many elements, it basically just continues on where a body is found of a woman and it's basically been drained of all blood, and this story is the foundation story to the main vampiric sort of theme throughout this series. This is the main episode, and then we kind of have the theme intertwined throughout the whole series. I actually think that the plot for this series is a little bit more than the stories themselves. I think there's only one episode really that I actually feel is not directed to the plot whatsoever, and then we have sort of the other ones that are always related to the main theme of this series. So episode 1, 2 and 4 are kind of all related in a big way. Then episode 3 is kind of a little bit of a standalone, which I do quite like that. It's a bit of a change for Jago and Lightfoot really, because normally we do have 4 cases that kind of have a theme that is throughout episode 1, episode 2 and episode 3, and then that sort of comes to the forefront in episode 4. So yeah, it's a little bit of a different format. But Lightfoot and Saunders is basically your standard murder mystery once again, where bodies are being found drained of blood, and Lightfoot needs to try and figure out what's going on. So he decides to get one of his more professional sides, not Jago this time round, somebody who's a little bit more up there in the higher ranks, to in fact find out how these bodies are being drained of blood. And he actually approaches Saunders for this job, which is somebody that he's knew for quite a long time in his life. And throughout the story as well, you have Jago trying to get involved within the episode and kind of getting involved within the case, and naturally all the strings come together at the very end. His way of trying to get into the story is in fact a rather pivotal point at the very end of the episode as well, which is nice. And also the way that we have Mags the match girl as well, this person who is blind, or at least we think is blind, who is selling matches to try and gain sympathy. It turns out that somebody gets murdered right near her. It turns out that the murderer thinks that, well, because she is blind, as everybody thinks she is, they won't be able to see the person that has in fact taken and done the murders, and it turns out that that may lead to a few deaths later on in the episode as well. So I really do like the way that this episode is a little bit of a Jack the Ripper kind of theme, a series of murders, Victorian London going sort of rather frantic at the idea of people being let loose and killing people, and that whole idea as well of the sort of sucking blood out of people's bodies, leaving them completely drained, is basically your standard vampiric story, and I do quite like that. It definitely goes to the more gothic horror elements for Jago and Lightfoot, which is something that is returned in future series as well. So yeah, I do really like this episode as an opening part. However, I think it could have just been a little bit more powerful. I do expect a little bit more, maybe a bit more involvement with the vampire throughout this story, sort of a bit more featuring him, because he was brought in at the very end of the episode, but we didn't really see too much of him. I would have liked to sort of maybe see his motives developed a little bit more or something like that. Also, just to mention at the very end of this episode as well, Ellie dies. Of course she does, as we all know, because she dies in series 2. But yeah, we do have a moment where Ellie dies in this episode, and then that links onto the theme of this rest of the series as well, which at this point of listening to this series, I would have probably assumed that Ellie was dead. So yeah, I do like the way we have once again that risk factor in there. So yeah, moving on to episode 2, which is the Necropolis Express, written by Mark Morris, and it's basically Jago and Lightfoot go on a death train, yay, where people in London, basically all the poor people who are dead, go into a body train essentially, and then they get dumped in a massive mass grave on the very outside of London. And yeah, it's kind of a bit of a dark plot, and that continuation of course, Ellie is on this train and she is dead, and Jago and Lightfoot need to sit on the train with these dead people. And I kind of like the idea of Jago and Lightfoot going on this little bit of a field trip kind of thing, going out of Victorian London into the fresh country atmosphere. Jago gets scared of cows, as you would assume. Lightfoot is kind of more adapted to this situation because he's been in the countryside before. So yeah, I do like this idea of them going and doing different things. It's kind of Jago and Lightfoot go on holiday, and it's a little bit of a nice break from the sort of scenario of Victorian London, especially throughout the series. It is the more grim side of Victorian London that we see quite a lot of. So yeah, this episode is a little bit of a breather. I have a train in this one. I quite like trains, so that is good. A few bonus marks for the train. And yeah, this episode is basically about bringing people back to life in sort of a way that uses electricity, and it turns out that people are brought back to life, which in fact helps sort of the main major plot arc for this series. And it is a rather fun one, but a rather sort of grim episode as well. Sort of the way that we're experimenting with dead bodies, I think, is a thing that we wouldn't really see too often in Doctor Who, because I think it is essentially sort of an Undertaker's kind of job, which yeah, it is a little bit grim, but at the same time I like the way that we have this resurrection idea, and Ellie ends up being resurrected by this machine, and then that turns out that we have the vampiric plot once again coming to the forefront for the rest of the series, and Ellie is basically suffering from becoming half vampire, half sort of human. She's kind of got a little bit of a sanity in there, but at the same time she's being gradually took over, leading to Lightfoot needing to, in fact, a lot of his time spent to treating Ellie in private space of his own home, which is rather interesting. We get to see his more personal life, sort of his home with Miss Hudson, and sort of the way that at the very end of the series as well, he nearly loses his job, which is kind of interesting. And at the same time of Jago having these money problems and him getting the new Regency as well, it's sort of a really nice way to actually bring in the personal lives of these two characters. So I do definitely like the way that this series does that. Then at the very end of this episode as well, we kind of have the consequences of episode 1 coming back to attack Jago and Lightfoot essentially in more ways than one, leading to the series finale at the very end and kind of leading to the main events of what happens in that. So as you can see, they are all intertwined. Second episode, I think that this is a really nice one to explore a different element of Jago and Lightfoot, and it's nice to kind of go out into the countryside and get a breath of fresh air in a graveyard full of dead people. But hey, it's Jago and Lightfoot, so things can't be that happy for long. Episode 3 is The Theatre of Dreams, written by Jonathan Morris, and is an episode that is kind of the underdog of the series. I absolutely bloody adored this one. This might in fact be one of my favourite episodes of Jago and Lightfoot ever. It's kind of hard to tell at this point because I've still got a lot to listen to, but this episode is wild. It's got illusions in, and as I say, it's pretty much our independent episode for the series, and is a great example to in fact have one of these experimental episodes within this sort of vampiric series. However, once again, we do have the idea of vampires coming in sort of into the last act of this episode, but it doesn't really have a too pivotal part to play. But this whole episode is basically around sort of a theatre type thing, kind of sort of travel show. It's kind of like one of those, in fact, an alien from outer space that takes the personality of people and then kind of sucks them into this machine. And honestly, I wasn't expecting much from this story to start with, because it did start out as your stereotypical episode of Jago and Lightfoot, where they go to this kind of theatre place to find out what will be good to book at the new Regency for the first few acts to get a lot of money in, as Jago now has the control of the full theatre. And we basically have the theme of Jago and Lightfoot, or at least Jago, employs the main sort of murderous person of the story as the main entertainment act for the new Regency. So it has been used a lot throughout Jago and Lightfoot already. I do believe that we had that in Jago and Lightfoot Series 1, and we have it many times in the later series as well. However, this episode does something slightly different I'm going to get onto now immediately. It's pretty much your illusion episode where Jago and Lightfoot gets sucked into this theatre, where it's the case of, is this a dream, is this reality, and then we have them trying to get out of this kind of atmosphere kind of thing. And it's just so odd, because at the very end of this episode you feel like it's the end, but it's not. It's actually Doctor Who kind of, but going a little bit wild. It's like Last Christmas, but done in a decent way. I would like to sort of describe it as that, because especially the main theme throughout the story as well, we have Madame Detrimony, who is pretty much more than a plaything of the machine itself, and we have a character called Fosco in there as well, and the way that they can in fact play out sort of people's lives, and the way that we have them using the dreams and sort of nightmares as well of different people, sort of attacking them personally while they're in this theatre, and essentially they use everybody as puppets, and I love that. We have these weird and wacky things going on. We have Jago and Lightfoot essentially within a scenery cardboard cutout of the Red Tavern, and then when they open a door they end up in Lightfoot's house, and then when they open another door they end up in the mortuary. And it is essentially what if Jago and Lightfoot was a theatre drama, but they're in fact being controlled by this alien from outer space, and then we have them going into these different nightmare scenarios. I did feel like I was going mad throughout the final act of this episode, the way they actually jumped from different scenarios and the way they had all these different things going on. We had Dr. Saka being attacked. I think Inspector Quick being killed as well at one point, but of course not in real life because he's in fact alive still. Then we have Ormond Saka coming back and sort of being one of the puppets within the theatre itself. And then at the very end of this episode, we have essentially the only way to get out of this theatre is to acknowledge it is an illusion, and to basically for Jago to perform to this fake audience, sort of to be the main announcer guy that he is in the new Regency, and actually break the fourth wall. And I absolutely adore this moment. I think that Jonathan Morris has done an excellent job here, where he says, we're kind of in this theatre, we're performing this for you, and you know, this is all an act, everything is fake. And then sort of he gets a little bit carried away with this, and you think, oh, he's breaking sort of the fourth wall within the fourth wall of the actual sort of Jago Lightfoot theatre itself. And then they go one step above that, and yeah, Jago gets carried away and goes, hey, you never know, we could sort of be some characters that have been created by a madman in this like audio drama universe, and kind of we are being written right now, and we're not real. Then Lightfoot just turns around and says, steady on, Jago, and that is essentially sort of them breaking the fourth wall, then breaking the fourth wall again to actually break the fourth wall to our audience, as opposed to sort of the audience and the theatre itself. I think it's just wild to actually have them all together, and I love the way that this was a breaking the fourth wall done incredibly nicely. Unlike episodes such as Sit Under the Lake that were kind of a little bit odd and a little bit off structure, I think that this episode is just a wacky and wild adventure, and I did absolutely love it. And I think that for this episode alone, if you're a Jago Lightfoot fan or an experimental Doctor Who fan, then this is definitely an episode for you. The series finale is The Ruthven Inheritance, written by Andy Lane, of course the person who originally wrote The Mahogany Murders, and this is basically Lightfoot gets sacked from his job because of what's going on with Ellie. They basically think something dodgy is going on because he's led this woman in from a pub, naturally a very lower class woman, and he's a rather higher class male, into this place, and yeah, he's lost all of his jobs because of that, being a professor as well as somebody that does sort of uni lectures in there as well, which is something that we later see in other series also. And yeah, this episode is basically they get led to this main big massive manor in order to do a little bit of excavation work. We have Ormond Saka returning once again to be a little bit more of an important role, so Lightfoot and Saka in fact team up once more, which I do quite like. I like their relationship, and I love the way that at this point in the series, Lightfoot doesn't necessarily entirely rely on Jago. I think that he doesn't understand all of his skills, and they kind of still not necessarily don't have trust, but I think that their characters still need to kind of fully blossom together and kind of understand each other's strengths, meaning that Lightfoot by this point is still employing certain people that he knows is very good in dead bodies and things like that, sort of much like himself. So yeah, it's nice to see that he's doing that, because he still doesn't really have the full trust over Jago. But this is the episode where we have once again the vampire theme, but we kind of have this extraterrestrial alien vampire idea where they're not just vampires, they are vampires that have developed over time, and we have this whole theme of this manor house being essentially the selected breeding ground for this vampire sort of race, essentially, where we have this main person called Ruthven, who is the main sort of kind of your stereotypical Victorian man kind of character, and yeah, it turns out that he's been selecting breeding these vampires for a very long time, picking the ones with more strength and then sort of breeding them on further to sort of kind of create this kind of super vampire at the very end of the series. And we have Jago going up against basically this massive creature that kind of reminded me from the sound design a little bit of the Lazarus show from the Lazarus Experiment. But yeah, it's a kind of unusual episode, once again ties in that science fiction element as opposed to kind of just your historical myth kind of vampire story. So I do quite like that. Of course, at the very end of the series as well, we do have the Ellie Higson kind of vampire theme closed off, which is nice. However, this may return in other series that I've already reviewed from the later half of sort of the adventures, which, hey, you know, spoilers for the future. But yeah, I think I can't really go into this episode without fully going into the actual main premise of the series that I necessarily don't want to go into, because I want to leave the majority of the script up to you to go and kind of find out. But I think that this episode is a nice one to kind of show how, once again, you kind of got this person with a lot of money in Victorian society who is using it for the bad and kind of developing it and kind of changing himself. And then we have the return as well. I think it would be fair to say sort of it's not really much of a spoiler, but the first series we kind of had this male character that was Dr. Tulp, who was a rather sort of insane time traveller kind of guy, which he was also in the Mahogany Murders rather briefly near the very end as well. I'll just put that back in there so I don't lose it. Yeah, we had sort of a main male enemy for this series, and then in this one we kind of have the main vampire enemy, which is of course Gabriel Saunders, who was in the first episode, who was resurrected in the second one, and now he's back in full form to basically be his massive supreme vampire maniac kind of character. And yeah, he's a fun villain. I think that he could have potential to return in the future for Jago and Lightfoot, I think, which, you know, who knows, he may. I think that he's one of those characters that just has a good amount of sort of science fiction, but at the same time still those qualities of Victorian myth and kind of the historical aspect in there as well. And you still have your traditional, so you don't have a vampire sort of on a place that has water running underneath it, kind of those things that are, you don't know if they're myths, but it's sort of things that are passed around, sort of old wives' tales from many, many years ago. And then you have sort of things such as stakes as well, and jabbing stakes through the heart of people. Garlic, I do believe, is mentioned sort of once or twice in there as well. So you do have your classic vampire themes, but at the same time a few science fiction elements in there as well, which is really nice. So yeah, generally overall for this series, it is a really fun one. I think that the main idea for this one is that vampiric kind of curse episode thing, which is a massive adventure kind of intertwined throughout the whole series. However, I absolutely love, oddly, the main sort of gem in the crown for me is the theatre of dreams and that sort of wacky, wild sort of illusion story. I just absolutely love it. And I think that generally this series has a really nice atmosphere as well, which is mainly down to the directing. Once again, we have the themes of this series as well returning. We have the Jago and Lightfoot music, which is kind of in between the different episode sort of sections, where you have them, say, going to the manor house whilst they're travelling. You kind of have a slowed down version of the Jago and Lightfoot music to kind of show off the different chapters throughout the series, which is a really nice kind of style that the early episodes of Jago and Lightfoot have, which I'm pretty sure is something that was worked sort of out of Jago and Lightfoot in the later series. Don't know why, but I feel like it's got its own development kind of, and I feel like it's got its own format that Doctor Who doesn't have, which is good. At this very early stage you have them already developing and actually changing and having something that is recognisably Jago and Lightfoot and not Doctor Who. And by this point we have nobody from Doctor Who, or at least the Doctor Who universe, in Jago and Lightfoot yet, after sort of 9 cases including the Mahogany Murders. However, at the very end of this series we do get a little bit of a hang up, but we do get, in fact, if you don't know, you can click off this review now, but it is something that we'll be covering very much in the series 3 review. We get the return of Leela, played by Louise Jameson, which in fact she has a quest for Jago and Lightfoot to go on, which is rather exciting. We also have an idea of monsters in the Thames as well, which Inspector Quick says about as well, so that would be rather interesting to see what happens with that in series 3. But hey, we're going to need to wait until the next review to take a look at that. In summary, for the second series of Jago and Lightfoot, another really impressive set of adventures that continue to develop a unique style compared to that of other Doctor Who media. One of Series 2's most praiseworthy points is the rather large change compared to that of the first box set. That was much more dedicated to introducing the different types of storytelling that the Jago and Lightfoot spin-off series could achieve. This time round we have a much more focused story based on a gothic vampire tale plot arc, playing to the darker strengths of Jago and Lightfoot, as well as the concepts of death and resurrection. I love the contrast between the well-known vampire myths developed into a form of science fiction reality, making the enemy feel like an even bigger dangerous threat. Not only is the plot arc greatly presented throughout Lightfoot and Saunders, the Necropolis Express and the Ruthven Inheritance, but this series also contributes a great standalone adventure in the Theatre of Dreams, the type of war-breaking inspired experimental narrative I love Big Finish for. As always, the cast are as strong as ever, especially when faced with not only threats from outer space, but also the day-to-day issues that Victorian life can produce. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this review, and I hope you've enjoyed what I've said about this series. I hope that I've kind of persuaded some of you to go out and buy them. I did just generally give Jago and Lightfoot a chance, because it is a really interesting niche and interesting area of Doctor Who that is completely different, and it's in its own bubble, and yeah, I absolutely love it. So yeah, if you've got any questions about Jago and Lightfoot, then please do leave them in the description below. I'll definitely reply to them at some point in the future, or if you need any help to kind of get into Jago and Lightfoot, then I will hopefully be able to answer your questions. In the description below, as I said at the start of the video, I will leave the link to go and buy this release from the Big Finish website. I guess I'll see you all in another Doctor Who review at some point in the near future. Maybe a product review, maybe another audio drama review. However, next time for Jago and Lightfoot, I will be taking a look at Series 3. I guess I'll see you all in the next Doctor Who review at some point in the near future. Bye for now.